All right, how you guys doing? My name is Chuck Ferrugia. It's been a pleasure going through 703 with all you guys, and here to talk a little bit about our papers that we're submitting. Right, I did mine on Thomas Jefferson, and I wanted to look at kind of his role in kind of developing the educational system. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, huge fan of the founders. I teach American history at the high school, local high school here, and I love these guys. I love the idealism that we find in the Constitution, and I love how it requires the constant kind of interpretation. It's a constant play. It's a constant give and take between the way we interpret that document and the founders and what they were thinking about in general. So that's kind of why I pushed myself towards Thomas Jefferson and learning about some of these philosophical educational principles and realism and idealism that we've been looking at. So that's why I went with Thomas Jefferson. All right. So I broke my paper down into kind of three areas about Thomas Jefferson and why I think he was important and influential in the American education system. And one, I would look to a document that he wrote in 1779 called The More General Diffusion of Knowledge. And in this document, it became the basis of what other educational thinkers will use later on, Horace Mann being one of them, to kind of look at what really is the point of an education system and what is the point of being a part of an educated citizenry. And that's where Jefferson steps in, like his democratic ideals that we talk about. I talk a little bit about that when we go to his meaning of democracy, but his ideals of republicanism. These are all terms that he kind of uses interchangeably. We wouldn't use them today interchangeably necessarily the way Jefferson did, but my point is that he was definitely above or beyond his time in understanding that there needs to be uh, an educated body that is going to protect democratic or republicanism ideas, however you want to distinguish that. But we needed to have educated populace, and what that meant was kind of establishing what education looked like for them. So um, and some of these bills that he would try to pass, they never did pass. There's something that Jefferson never saw come to fruition in his lifetime. But like I said with Horace Mann, they kind of leaned on a lot of Jefferson's writings at the time to create a system in play for, like I said, in the educated masses that we would need to protect democratic ideals. Um, uh, it's also funny because we look at like heavily rooted in religious dogma. Jefferson was one of those guys. He's often credited in history with being an atheist, but that's actually not true at all. He, even in writing the Declaration, where he refers to the Creator, right? He refers to God and unalienable rights, right? Things that come down from higher powers. And Jefferson, his take on it was really weird. He just didn't like the dogma of the church. He even beyond the Catholic kind of component of the Reformation, he did not like a lot of the evangelical type of teachings that he was a part of. So Jefferson, and I put this in the paper. He was like a religious anomaly back in like that time frame, especially in Virginia, especially that Southern gentry that he was a part of, the Virginia gentry. And so he pushed back on a lot of those, that religious order. And he said, whoa, whoa, whoa. He believed in Jesus. He believed in the teachings of Christ, but he did not believe that at any point should they trample this idea of liberty and the idea that institutions that we've created among men don't have the ability to use God as a means to stifle liberty. And he was really big on that. So that's one definite area that we're talking about with Jefferson. One of the other parts that I talk about in my paper is I put on here the liberal arts. He was a big proponent of sharing this idea of Greek and Roman-based literature. He found that in that Enlightenment movement that he was a part of, right? Where they kind of they wanted to create their own explanation of things, at least in my interpretation. A lot of what the Enlightenment wanted to do was not just accept the status quo. They didn't necessarily need to rebrand anything or reprove anything, but they just wanted to say, well, if it is what it is, then let it be, because now at this moment in time, we are rethinking what might have been, or what the explanations may, where they may have been coming from. So I think Jefferson does a really good job in bringing together some of those liberal arts kind of ideologies to the table, studying the Greeks, studying the Romans. I mean, that's what these founding fathers that we celebrate so much, even in our classrooms today, even in my home. I got Washington right here, and then on this side I have Alexander Hamilton. These guys, these founders, they were immersed in the Greek and Roman literature, because this is what enlightened them, so to speak. It's like kind of a movement away from just kind of church doctrine, but it was also a reinvigoration of some ancient culture into the aspect of what they had going on, right? And so a big part of it is the curriculum, why they influence, or why the push for some Greek and Roman-based curriculum was there, because to really understand these concepts was something that they didn't want the American populace to lose at that time, especially as they're moving further away from. Or I shouldn't say moving further away, but as they move and the interpretation of these documents get kind of exfoliated, and it kind of bears out some other meanings that maybe they didn't think of at the time. Which brings me to my last point in the paper. We discussed this idea of democracy. Jefferson is credited with being what we call he establishes the anti-federalist party, right? So he's not a federalist. He's not going to be the John Adams. He's not going to be the Alexander Hamilton that we see. He has another thought, another direction, right? This agricultural, agrarian kind of shift that he wants to take, and he aligns that, and he calls themselves the Democratic Republicans, right? That's kind of his thing. And you'll see that in Jefferson's writing, he uses an interchangeable term of republicanism and democracy. He actually uses them interchangeably. And when we try then to explain his writing and his meanings after that point, Jefferson becomes kind of an anomaly, not only in religious sense, as I mentioned before, but also what does he mean when he says democracy? Because when Jefferson speaks of democracy, it is not democracy, or the use of that word as we see it today. Jefferson, in truth, and I should say, in my opinion, is an elitist. He thinks that there should be this general diffusion of knowledge, and there should be this idea that education should be based in this Greek and Roman curriculum. But when he says that everybody should be educated, and the demos, right, that Greek word, the first part of that, where the people should be, he doesn't really mean the people. What he's talking about is a group of people. A specific group of people that actually education will then help kind of diffuse or separate, like the cream of the crop, right? The ones that with education have those abilities to lead, they have the ability to kind of be more analytical, and then have like aspects of leadership. They'll kind of rise to the top. And when they rise to the top, that's the diffusion that he's talking about. It's not necessarily a mass diffusion, but it's diffusion of kind of those people that will ultimately become the political leaders of their constituency. I think how he saw himself and the rest of them, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Rush, for instance, Washington, all of these guys that were of that time frame, Monroe and Madison. And so he kind of says, well, yeah, this is going to bore people like us, the thinkers. Again, not that it's going to create one mass mindset, because when we look at the founding fathers, there's a whole, there's a whole spectrum, there's a whole array of difference and tolerance that we see amongst all of them. But it always makes me have a little bit more to say about Jefferson when I think about the way he uses democracy, the way he kind of writes, and the picture that I have on here with this quote, when the people fear the government, there is tyranny, and when the government fears the people, there is liberty. And I think that's a great quote to have in there from Jefferson, especially because of what we're going in right now. I hope all of you are staying safe and well with the COVID and Corona issue that are going on. I hope your families are doing well. This is depressing times. It's unprecedented times, and yeah, and it's funny to think about the people that are kind of pushing against the system. It all just kind of, to me, comes full circle. What is this idea of democracy where everybody has a say? What is this idea of education where are we all on the same page as far as the information that is being broadcasted, and are we able to discern what is real and what is not, and how we make decisions based on that? So that's what my paper is about. Not necessarily anything that I said about COVID, that last section, but this is Thomas Jefferson and his influential kind of ideas that he had on the need for the American populace to be educated. And again, I think there's a lot of ways where we can poke at him. There's a lot of ways where we can scrutinize him as a leader, as a political thinker. Again, maybe not everybody's a Jeffersonian. Some of us might be more Hamiltonian. I am, but he's a wonderful character to look at in this context, I think, because it shows the duality. It shows the many hats that we wear, and the many facets that we can all kind of learn from people that might look at us a little bit differently, or we might view things a little bit different from them. But ultimately, that's kind of where I am with this. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you next time. God bless. Good luck with for all of us and the rest of what we're doing. God bless. Thank you.